Well, now, at this point, America has completed its manifest destiny, east to west, north to south. But wait a minute, a turn of events on the other side of the continent would add another large chunk of territory to the United States. See, Alaska would be handed to the U.S. on a silver platter. The United States would purchase all of Alaska for the low price of just 35 cents an acre. Now, how the heck did that happen? Well, we have to go back to 1799 when Russia began colonizing Alaska with fur trappers and then missionaries. Everything was going okay. Alaska was making some money, but really not enough. And then Russia found itself in a war. Okay, this was the Crimean War. It was fought from October 1853 to February 1856. Now, the Russians were on one side, and you had the Ottoman Empire, France, the United Kingdom, and Sardinia-Piedmont Kingdom. Now, I'm not going to go into the reasons for the war, but you can bet religion had something to do with it. Okay, Russia came out on the losing side. Russia now had a problem. Their Alaska colony was in danger of being taken over by the British in Canada. The last thing the Tsar wanted was to lose another war with the British. It would be a major embarrassment, not only to mention a loss of prestige on the world stage. Okay, so looking at a map, the Tsar and his advisors realized they could stick it to the British and make some money as well. An offer to buy Alaska was made to the United States. Now, the preliminary discussions were held during the winter of 1859-1860. This was during the last year of the Buchanan presidency. Now, you see, Buchanan was busy ignoring the dissolution of the Union over the slavery issue. So discussions over Alaska did not get very far, and it wouldn't be until after the Civil War that negotiations would begin again. Anyways, the official transfer of ownership took place on October 18, 1867. Now, initially it was thought that Alaska would become an important market for the country's products, and Alaska would also serve as a base for American trade with Asia, as well as an important strategic asset to project U.S. power in the Pacific. Now, the man responsible for the deal was Secretary of State William H. Seward. Okay, the press derided him. They called the deal Seward's Folly or Seward's Icebox. All the experts, now today we would call them the talking heads on the cable networks, gave their opinion that Seward was crazy for buying this frozen wasteland. In the end, Seward was right though. Well, why? Okay, gold was discovered in the Klondike region of Alaska in 1896. So, America was sitting pretty. We had gold in California, gold in Alaska. We were basically in the money. The boundaries of America are now set. We have more land than people. We don't need any more land, right? Well, actually, no. You see, there was this guy by the name of Frederick Jackson Turner. He was an American historian during the early 20th century who taught at the University of Wisconsin. Now, he wrote a paper in 1893 titled, not entitled, but titled, The Significance of the Frontier in American History, and delivered it to the meeting of the American Historical Association in Chicago. Now, today it is known as the Frontier Thesis or the Turner Thesis. In this thesis, Turner propounds American exceptionalism and individuality due to the way Americans learned to adapt and overcome obstacles and hardships to settle the West. In the last sentence of his first paragraph, Jackson wrote, "The existence of an area of free land, its continuous recession, and the advance of American settlement westward explained American development." Now, Jackson ends his paper with this sentence, "And now, 4 centuries from the discovery of America, at the end of 100 years of life under the Constitution, the frontier has gone, and with its going has closed the first period of American history." Now, officially, the U.S. government said the same thing. The chief of the U.S. Census, Robert Percival Porter, announced the official closure of the frontier in 1890 census. So it was official. America was no longer an expansionist power. The country's lust for land was satiated. Not quite. See, See, there were still plenty of pro-expansionists in the country. As far as they were concerned, the continental frontiers might be closed, but the world awaited. The pro-expansionists cast their visions across the seas. One man in particular would have a far-reaching effect on American expansion. Alfred Thayer Mahan wrote a very influential book in 1890 titled The Influence of Sea Power Upon History. Now you can locate this quote at the history.state.gov Office of the Historian, Department of State. This is what Mahan said. The British control of the seas, combined with corresponding decline in naval strength of its major European rivals, paved the way for Great Britain's emergence as a world's dominant military, political, and economic power. Now, Mahan and some leading American politicians believed that these lessons could be applied to U.S. foreign policy, particularly in the quest to expand U.S. markets overseas. Mahan's work is relevant to this day. For America to project its influence overseas, the country needed a naval force which could support its foreign policy objectives, protect its merchant fleet, as well as provide force protection to American business interests overseas. Now, for the United States to accomplish these goals, Mahan pointed out that a modern steel ship, steam-powered navy was needed. However, the U.S. could only project its influence as far as a ship's coal supply lasted. The United States needed coaling stations. Now, to that end, the next possession the United States would acquire would be the Hawaiian Islands. In 1820, a large group of missionaries arrived in Hawaii. Over the next 70 years, the descendants of these missionaries became the dominant force in Hawaiian politics and business. One of these descendants was a man named Sanford B. Dole. Dole was a lawyer and active in Hawaiian politics. He was an advisor to Kalakua and his heir queen, Lili Okolani, until January 17, 1893, when a coup d'etat took place and the queen and her kingdom of Hawaii were overthrown. Now, Dole was smart, though. He didn't take part in the coup, but he made himself available to be a candidate for the president of the provisional government, and then in 1894, Dole ran for the presidency of the Republic of Hawaii. He would be the only president of the Republic of Hawaii from 1894 till 1898, at which time, yep, you guessed it, the United States annexed Hawaii as a territory with the passage of the Newland Resolution in Congress. Okay, so the United States now had a coaling base in the Pacific. Everything should be perfect, right? Well, you would think so, but there was this pesky little Caribbean island causing a problem. To be more specific, Spain was causing problems in their colony in Cuba. Okay, the first Spanish settlement in Cuba was 1511. By the late 1800s, the Spanish Empire had become a shell of its former self. Central and South America had thrown off Spanish rule early in the 19th century. By the late 1890s, Spain controlled Cuba, Puerto Rico in the Caribbean, and the Philippines and Guam Island in the Pacific. Now you have what's called the Cuba Libre movement, which forced the Spanish government to take drastic measures to maintain control of what was left of their empire in the Americas. In 1995, a gentleman by the name of Jose Martin launched an independence movement in Cuba. Now, at the same time in the United States, there was a strong Free Cuba lobby at work. They were known as the Cuban Junta. They were led by Tomas Estrada Palma. Now, this group was influential in gaining support from leading newspaper publishers of the time, as well as Washington officials. Now, they were able to raise money to send arms to Cuba to fight the Spanish. Now, it was through their efforts that popular opinion supported Cuban independence. The business interests in the United States and Cuba were thinking on a different line. Now, the United States wanted to negotiate a settlement rather than intervene on the Cuban side. A war was no good for business. Now, a major reason for American popular support was the Spanish reconcentration policy. The rebel fighters were conducting a guerrilla war against the Spanish plantation owners. They were using small units. The rebels would hit the plantations, destroying everything they could, then disappear into the jungles. This tactic was called hit and run. Now the rebels were being sustained by the local peasant population. The destruction at the hands of the rebels forced an escalation response from the Spanish rulers. Okay, enter General Weyler. His reconcentration order forced all peasants to be relocated into fortified towns guarded by Spanish forces. The resulting atrocities were inevitable. With the overcrowding, minimum food, unsanitary conditions, the peasants began dying in large numbers. Now, it was due to this Spanish reconcentration policy that the American public support for the Cuban rebels gained momentum. Now, the policy was bad enough. However, it was the newspapers which stirred the pot of Cuban freedom to a fever pitch. This was more commonly known as yellow journalism. Joseph Pulitzer, he was the publisher of the New York World, and William Randolph Hearst, he was the publisher of the New York Journal, used these atrocities to sell their newspapers. These two men were the face of yellow journalism during the 1890s. Competition for readership and circulation was intense. The more sensational a headline and the story, the higher the circulation. Facts were just an annoying part of the story, manipulated to reach a particular conclusion. Now, this was called the era of yellow journalism. Okay, so Cuban rebels intercepted a letter from the Spanish ambassador to the United States. His name was Enrique Dupuy de Lome, to Don Jose Canelles, the foreign minister of Spain. The rebels turned the letter over to Hearst's paper, the New York Journal, on February 9, 1898. The New York Journal posted the full content of the letter. The damning part of the letter stated, "McKinley is weak and bitter for the admiration of the crowd, besides being a would-be politician who tries to leave a door open behind himself while keeping on good terms with the jingoes of his party." Okay, now you have to understand the term jingoes refers to politicians at that time who wanted to intervene in Cuba on behalf of the rebels. They wanted a war with Spain, with the end result being the end of Spain's colonial empire in the Western Hemisphere. Now, the term jingoist was used as a pejorative term towards politicians who held views that were extreme or nationalistic and marked especially by a belligerent foreign policy. A historical comparison today could be the politicians in both parties who believe in the forever wars. Now, the reaction to the letter was what one would expect. The San Francisco Call, February 9, 1898 edition stated, "Dupuy de Lome's vile abuse of the president." In it, McKinley is styled as a low politician, accused of truckling to the rabble of the country. Truckling means to be obsequious, okay? All right, moving on. Now, the Sackville west of Spain must be given his passport. Prompt action in order. Although the diplomat declares the epistle a forgery, the writing is like his. War fever and jingoism were rising to a fevered pitch. As a matter of fact, Hearst had sent the famous artist Frederick Remington to Havana with orders to stay until war broke out. Now, there's a famous quote from Hearst in response to a telegraph Remington sent to Hearst. Now, this is what the this is the exchange between the two. W.R. Hearst, New York Journal, New York. Quote, "Everything is quiet. There is no trouble here. There will be no war. I wish to return, Remington." Close quotes. Now Hearst responds, Remington, Havana, "Please remain. You furnish the pictures. I'll furnish the war." W.R. Hearst. Close quotes. Now, ironically, the king of yellow journalism might also be a victim of it in history. You see, this exchange between Hearst and Remington had been repeated so many times that people take it for the truth. In fact, there has never been any verified documented evidence that this exchange took place between the two men. But hey, never let the facts get in the way of a good story. That was the motto of yellow journalism. All right, now, January 12th, 1988, a riot broke out in Havana. Now, the mob included officers of the Spanish Army who were demonstrating against the Havana newspapers that favored autonomy. American consul Fitzhugh Lee was concerned that the violence might be turned against the Americans and their property. So he alerted Captain Charles D. Sigbey of the USS Maine to be prepared to sail at a moment's notice from Key West. Now, just like today, the interventionists pushed for a show of force. So, President McKinley, Secretary of the Navy John D. Long, and Assistant Secretary of State William R. Day decided to send the Maine to Havana. They believed this would satisfy those calling for Cuban intervention in the United States, and since a visit by a warship of other powers to Havana occurred regularly, would not create an issue in Cuba. So, on January 25th, 1898, President McKinley approved the orders sending the USS Maine, which was a battleship, to Havana with orders to just show the flag and protect American citizens and American interest if needed. The Maine steamed out of Key West Naval Base and arrived 4 hours later in Havana Harbor. Now, for the next 20 days, everything went fine. There was no fighting between U.S. naval forces or Spanish forces. In fact, it was quite the opposite. The reception of the USS Maine was cordial and proper. The captain of the Maine, Captain Sigbey, reports to Secretary of the Navy Long, indicated that the visit was a diplomatic success. Then, on February 15th at 9:40 p.m., an explosion occurred that ripped the Maine wide open. Captain Sigbey's message to Secretary of the Navy Long stated, SecNav, Washington, D.C., Maine blown up in Havana Harbor at 9:40 tonight and destroyed. Many wounded and doubtless more killed or drowned. Wounded and others on board Spanish man of war and the Ward Line steamer City of Washington. Send lighthouse tender from Key West. Want the derricks for removable effects to take movable equipment from the wreck, some of which is above water. For crew and the few pieces of equipment above the water. None has clothing other than that upon him. Public opinion should be suspended until further reports. All officers believed to be saved. Jenkins and Merritt, which were officers, not yet accounted for. Sigbey, Spain representatives, General Blanco now with me to express sympathy. Once word reached the States, the yellow journalists kicked the story into high gear. Even before an investigation had been ordered, both Hearst and Pulitzer tried to one-up each other in their headlines. So, the headlines of both papers on February 17th left the reader no doubt who was responsible for the tragedy. The New York Journal, February 17th, stated, torpedo hole discovered by government divers in the Maine. Startling evidence of Spanish treachery. The battleship and hundreds of American lives sacrificed in Havana Harbor. Now, not to be outdone by Hearst's journal, Pulitzer's paper, The World's front page said, in bold-face type, Maine explosion caused by bomb or torpedo. The World has sent special tugs with submarine divers to Havana to find out. Yeah, like the Navy was going to let those divers go in and look. Captain Sigbey suspicious. Sigbey, in a suppressed dispatch to the State Department, says the accident was an enemy. Now, the San Francisco Call, also part of the whole yellow journalism, stated that Captain Sigbey believed his ship was blown up from outside. Sigbey never said anything like that. Now, at this point, though, the press, or more specifically Hearst and Pulitzer, were pushing for war in their papers. The American public was also pushing for war due to the press coverage and the death toll. Out of a crew of 354 officers and men, 266 died in that explosion. Now, whenever American servicemen and women today are killed, the American public demands answers. If it is a known antagonist, they will demand payback. Now, before President McKinley could do anything, he had to initiate an investigation. So the investigation took 22 days. On the 23rd day, the Board of Inquiry released its findings. Key West, Florida, Monday, March 21st, 1898, 10 a.m. After full and mature consideration of all the testimony before it, the court finds as follows. The court then went through all the evidence and gave the following conclusion. In the opinion of the court, this effect could have been produced only by the explosion of a mine situated under the bottom of the ship at about frame 18 and somewhat on the port side of the ship. The court finds that the loss of the Maine on the occasion named was not in any respect due to the fault of negligence on the part of any of the officers or members of the crew of said vessel. In the opinion of the court, the Maine was destroyed by the explosion of a submarine mine which caused the partial explosion of 2 or more of the forward magazines. The court has been unable to obtain evidence fixing the responsibility for the destruction of the Maine upon any person or persons. The court could not conclusively blame the Spanish for the destruction of the Maine. They didn't need to, basically because as far as the Navy was concerned, the battleship Maine was blown up by a submarine mine, and since the Maine was in a harbor controlled by the Spanish, the culprit was obvious. It was Spain. So, on April 11, 1898, McKinley asked Congress for a declaration of war. In the second to last paragraph, McKinley states, "The Naval Court of Inquiry, which, it is needless to say, commands the unqualified confidence of the government, was unanimous in its conclusion that the destruction of the Maine was caused by an exterior explosion, that of a submarine mine. It did not assume to place the responsibility. That remains to be fixed. In any event, the destruction of the Maine by whatever exterior cause is a patent and impressive proof of a state of things in Cuba that is intolerable. The condition is thus shown to be such that the Spanish government cannot assure safety and security to a vessel of the American Navy in the harbor of Havana on a mission of peace, and rightfully there." Now, Congress debated this resolution from April 19th to April 20th. On the 21st, 1898, the United States blockaded Cuba. On April 23rd, Spain declared war on the United States because they blockaded Cuba, and then Congress responded on April 25th by issuing a formal declaration of war. Now, this was the turning point for the United States of America. According to Secretary of State John Hayes, the Spanish-American War was, in his language, a splendid little war, which it was. Okay, so that will be the subject of the next video in the U.S. History for High School series. Well, I hope you found this interesting. Now, if you did, ring the bell so you'll be notified when I post new content. Hit the thumbs up button, and please leave a comment below. But most importantly, share this video with your friends. Now, remember guys, the easiest way to earn an A in your course, just show up, take notes, and study your notes for 10 minutes every day. That's it. Anyways, thank you for watching.